And he runs the online Woods in Your Backyard course, which was kind of another aspect to this. Okay, we had all these in-person workshops. What about an online course? And Andrew did really the bulk load of the work that it took to put this into a format for on the University Canvas platform and everything else, and it's been quite successful. So, and he actually wrote an article that was published in the Journal of Extension about it as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you.
And I'll make sure I get that. Is it all ready to go?
I think
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I've had the great honor of working for Jonathan for just about 10 years now. In other workshops where he would step in and say, "Oh, and back there running the cameras is Andrew, and he's incredibly humble guy," and so on. I used to say, well, before I started working for Jonathan, I could identify 3 trees, and now I can identify 5.
Progress.
But then he started getting sick and tired of hearing it and said, "That doesn't say much about me." So I don't tell that joke anymore. But as he said, one of the things I've been doing is creating an online course, and it was based on a germ of an idea that started really when I first started working for him in 2012. And shortly after we finished the second edition of the Woods in Your Backyard, we said, now's the time to do it, because we thought about doing it with the first edition. The university decided they were going to change learning management systems from Blackboard to Canvas. And we said, okay, let's wait for that transition. And so what I did was I took the workbook and I took the guide and I put it online on Canvas. Now, that's easier said than done. And that's a whole workshop in itself. But we debuted it in the fall of 2016, and we offer it twice a year, spring and fall. And the next session actually starts on Monday, so we sold out again. I'm part-time for Jonathan, so I don't handle a lot of people. We limited to 25, which I figure is about as many as I can handle, and that's been a good number. And when we started it, we did not expect it to be perfect, and boy, howdy, was it not. This is talking about program delivery. We delivered the first program, and we had a number of participants who said, that link doesn't work, you've got a typo on this page, the figure doesn't load. And so I put a big piece of flip chart paper on my office wall and started writing down all the different things that needed to be fixed after the first session, after the second session, after the third session. And it's still there to remind me to keep an idea about what needs to be done and what needs to be improved. And since that first session, I'd like to say we've done a number of necessary improvements. We've now created a glossary that's completely interactive. If you wander through the Woods in Your Backyard printed guide, you'll see a glossary in the back. I took that and I made it interactive, so you can either hover over a term and get the definition, or you can go to the separate web page on a link. I've also created what I hope is a fairly comprehensive gallery of invasive species, invasive plants, photo gallery with links to articles in our Branching Out newsletter, nice little plug. And we've also created dozens of little videos featuring Jonathan Kays in the back of the room, where he does things like, here's how to maintain a chainsaw, here's how to do hack and squirt. 3 to 5 minute videos, and each of them is open captioned for ADA accessibility, little check mark there. We also streamlined one of the first things we did when we first introduced the course. Each section in that guide, we'd been creating a little quiz after each, and people found it extremely boring, extremely repetitive, and they didn't like it. And so we said, okay, we'll just lump it all at the end, so you can see how so we can assess how they're doing with the actual concepts after each module, as we call it online, or chapter in the book. This was also something I'm going to come back to in just a minute, but we streamlined the interface between the guide and the activities. When you're doing this in an online environment, you can't say to someone, okay, open your workbook to page 12. because there's no one there to open the workbook to page 12. But you can tell them, here's where the activity is. And so I'll come back to this in just a little bit. But one of the other things we started, this was Jonathan's favorite feature. Favorite feature of the first couple of years of this, we did an open evening chat. We wanted to get more interaction with the participants. And rather than just selling them the books and assessing their activities, we said, let's open up Canvas's chat feature. A couple of times, 3-4 times in a 10-week session, we opened it up in an hour evening. We didn't get a lot of participation. We didn't get a lot of feedback. But we did get some very sore fingers, because it was all text-based. And Jonathan said after a while, you know, I get tired of typing for an hour. So we decided to go to Zoom and do it that way, where we introduce a little topic that really isn't examined much in the guide. We go into it in a little more depth, and then we open things up for questions. Since the course debuted in the fall of 2016, we've had participants from as far west as Colorado, from as far south as South Carolina and Arkansas. But the vast majority of people have come from Maryland. Well, good thing too, we're the University of Maryland. We hope that's the case. Virginia comes a distant second. Right on cue, thank you, and I did not promise him anything for doing that. But they have a similar program. Pennsylvania has a similar program where we're doing all the same ideas. One of the things I found interesting was District of Columbia has had 6 people. Not a lot of open real estate in the District of Columbia. These are mostly people who own land somewhere else, but they just happen to live in the district. Now, I mentioned this very briefly earlier. This course is an example of what we call asynchronous learning. People are learning at their own pace. They're self-directed. There are no major deadlines except for the opening and the closing of the course content. And one of the things we discovered fairly early on was that we were probably asking too much of some people. Sometimes this was their first online course, and that was a challenge enough. But we'd also taken the activities and turned them into fillable field PDFs. And a lot of people weren't used to working with those either. So we were discovering that there was a real drop-off in participation after a certain point in the course session. And so what we decided to do was give them an option. When we revised and expanded the download and upload directions, we said, okay, here's something you can do instead. Rather than filling it in a PDF, go ahead and open that workbook to page 12 and complete the activity by hand. And then send me a picture of it. And invariably, I'll get pictures like this. Perfectly fine. I don't care if I see your arm, the shadow of your arm holding your cell phone. As long as I can read it, if it's got circles and arrows and paragraphs through the margins, I don't care. As long as I can read it, that's perfectly fine. And the great thing about this is it gives people an option. They can do it by PDF if they're comfortable, or they can do it by hand, or they can mix and match. And we get a lot of that. When we started that option, we had people who were doing it at about 17% in the total submissions of activities throughout the session. Now that average has increased to about 30%. We do have some outliers. A couple of sessions ago, last spring, we had more submissions by hand than by PDF. That was an outlier, but we've also got people who will do the entire set of activities by hand, except maybe the map, which they do from Google Earth. And the great thing is that they're not restricted to one or the other. And because this is asynchronous learning, they can do it all at once. I've had people finish a 10-week course in 3 weeks. I've had people come to me on the beginning of the 9th week and say, can I have a little more time? Well, yeah, we're usually pretty flexible. And then they'll send me everything in their workbook that they've taken pictures of in the last week. So it's up to them. We've also had a number of surveys to gauge what our effectiveness is in presenting this programming. Some open-ended questions, some closed-ended questions. Things like, did the course motivate you to learn more on the internet, to engage your neighbors, to work with your family? And then, of course, there's the famous other. What else did it motivate you to do? Learn about invasive species, work with county governments, restock our woods. Open-ended questions to find out where our effectiveness has come. As a result of this course, do you feel that you're more ... Once again, other. And one of the great things we hear from this question is it's gotten us more engaged with our family, with our children, with our grandchildren, with our neighbors. So we're making that connection not only to them, but to the people around them, to the greater ecosystem, if you will. This I would like to change a little. I would like to get that red slice to be a little larger. I would like to get these people more involved with the service providers. We're hoping to increase that through what we're doing here and through the other connections that we make. And we're seeing that they're contacting a number of different people. So that potential for the connection to the green industry, green service providers, is definitely there. We just have to make sure that the two parties know about each other. Now, Jonathan talked about the land care practices. There are 17 of them in Chapter 4, in Module 4, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But one of the great things about surveys is you get all sorts of great graphics. I'm not going to parse this for you. But we ask two basic questions. What are you willing to do for yourself, unpaid labor, and what are you doing what are you having people do for you, paid labor? And basically this comes down to these top 5. These are the things that people are willing to do for them by themselves. And I want you to note number 4, using herbicides to control invasive and exotic plants. It shows up here as well. It's a question of scale. If you've got a property with a couple of grapevines, most people are willing to learn how to go out and hack and squirt. But if they've got 5 acres of understory of Japanese stiltgrass, they're going to hire someone to tow it for them. What this comes down to is we've discovered that this is a very effective means of delivering the Woods in Your Backyard program. We're discovering that people are willing to work with us, and take a look at the left-hand pie there. That 1 to 10 acres that Jonathan's program has been targeting this whole time is 67% of the participants are in that particular ownership. Now, I said we debuted this in the fall of 2016. Roughly 20 to 25 participants per session, so that comes to 260 people managing upwards of 3,000 acres. When you think about it, in people who have less than an acre, half an acre and a half, 2 acres, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people who are doing some good because they're impacting a lot of that land, a lot of that natural area. The surveys have told us that 95% of the people who've taken the course and respond to our survey, of course, have impacted 95% of the land that they own. So that's really pretty impactful. So far, I hate to say conclusions because it's an ongoing thing. I can't make a conclusion about something that we still offer. But it basically comes down to this. This course is reaching people who couldn't join us for their, for a Saturday workshop. Craig used to say, yeah, let's go out and do every Saturday we're going to do a workshop. Jonathan would say, I'm sick and tired of doing Saturday workshops. That's one of the niches the online course will take care of. And we need to remember that we want to make sure to keep improving this with new videos, new content, continue to work with the green service providers to make those connections. And nearly everyone we've worked with has made some sort of an impact creating a natural area land project in one form or another. It may have been just that they went out and they decided to stop mowing half an acre. That's fine. Or maybe they wanted to take on some larger project. That's great too. Paid labor versus unpaid labor, it all comes down to the same thing. So what I want to leave you with is that while the online course is certainly non-traditional, I would like to say that certainly since the pandemic started, it can reach a lot of different people. A lot of people who can't come to a workshop, people who've said, you know, I really couldn't fit an series of afternoon workshops, series of weekend workshops or evening workshops into my schedule. I just couldn't do it. The online course for me is perfect. I make no pretensions that it's perfect. I would like to think that every time there's something else that needs to be improved. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Jonathan, let him talk a little bit more about.
We'll get the Maryland stuff out of the way.
Yeah, I got the Maryland stuff out of the way.
We can hear from.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Could you put Agnes, put my presentation up?
Is this the one, Jonathan?
Yeah. Yeah, so this was just that was the online course, and you know, I decided what to talk about this was just to put a few things out there. In terms of the formats, you know, doing this since 2006, literally, there's probably many thousands of people that have gone through some type of workshop or something like that, some face-to-face thing. Initially, you know, did a lot of presentations with county master gardeners and you know, 1 hour type things. But these are the formats that typically we were using, and Adam and I did actually, I think, you know, talked a lot about this and coordinated some of these efforts, right? So usually like 2 evening sessions from 6:30 to 9, 1 week apart. And it allowed basically the opportunity to, that overview I kind of gave you, and then with something on, there's like 4 sections. Yeah, the overview, and then the overall ecological concepts, right, and all that. And then the intermediate use areas, options for converting to natural areas was usually the second part of the first night. And then the third part was it wildlife? Oh, wildlife management. Oh, okay, that's supposed to be indented. So the third part was wildlife management. That usually would be on the second night, a week later. And then natural area management would be the second part of that second day, of that second evening. So you'd be focusing primarily the overview, ecological concepts, you know, what's involved, mapping and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, the intermediate use areas about lawn conversion and all that kind of stuff, right? Afforestation, riparian buffers and all that. And then wildlife management, and then finishing up with existing woodlands, how to improve those areas. So that was very common, did a lot of those. And I know that Adam and I shared a lot of notes and a lot of slides on how we did that. And that's where I kind of like some of those things I mentioned earlier about you don't want to talk to people for 2.5 hours. It's a killer at 6:30 at night. Anybody extension knows that. So, you know, you got to have food and coffee, but you also have to break it up. And then the other common forum was like these 1 and 2 hour master gardener, master naturalist talks. You know, kind of usually we would take the overview section and kind of enhance it, or depending on the audience. And I'm happy to share, you know, some of these presentations are online on our YouTube channel, but also happy to share them electronically with any of you guys, honestly, with no sense reinventing the wheel. But so that's kind of the formats we've used. It's not going forward.
It's not advancing.
Okay, so education for who? And this is kind of the whole thing about, you know, partnering and cooperation. You know, working with county or regional organizations, the idea of usually what worked best and is to kind of work with a local contact, the county extension office, master gardener coordinator, or in many cases it was a county planning agency had an interest in wanting to do some of these workshops because they had a lot of people with acreages. We have forestry boards in our state, in each county. State forestry agencies, environmental groups, whatever it might be. And my suggestion is always to provide the Woods in Your Backyard book and the workbook, plus other resources, because you work with some groups, oh, well, we don't want to charge anything. Well, my experience is, first of all, I never do a program I don't charge for. because if it don't charge for it, it has no value to people. That's my personal opinion, even if it's $5, you know. But really, just charge $15 for that book, and something is, they really go home with something. You know, make it personal. Like I said, that intro that I kind of did with you guys really helps people engage and know that they got their questions answered, and allows you to address a lot of common questions. For those of us in extension and teaching, you know, always have an exit survey, all right? Because you have to show impacts, you know, that's really important. And when I do a workshop too, we have a newsletter we put out, a quarterly forestry newsletter, many people do. I always ask people, I want to, as one of the benefits you get from attending this workshop is that you get to get a free subscription to our free newsletter. So when I first get there, I actually usually have a pad of paper, and I ask them, if you want to receive this, just write your name and email address on here, and that way you have permission, if ever it should arise, that you have permission from people to be put on a mailing list. So this is just an example of the Woods in Your Backyard evaluation and actually Adam came up with a lot of this initial language that's on here, but you know, knowledge gain, you know, and this is handed out at the end of the workshop. So you ask them at the end of the workshop about the situation and issues facing small acreage owners. What was your knowledge about that prior to the workshop and then after, on a scale of 1 to 10? Or it could be a scale 1 to 7, doesn't matter. And then you basically can ask that about the main components of the workshop, and you can get the difference. So there was a knowledge increase of 7.0. So, I lost my slides there. So, you know, that's something that has some value. People are learning something. And there's other questions. You know, the class delivery. At the beginning of the class, I hope to gain from taking this workshop, were my expectations realized? And then the important thing down here, this is stuff that people say they're going to do. Convert excessive lawn to natural area. Plan to, 50%, might to, you know. And so these are just numbers that for those of us that want to show impact, you can say, yeah, well, of course, what people say and what they're going to do are two different things, right? So it's not advancing. I'm not sure what's going on here.
I think it's my fault. This is what Dave just told me.
Okay. And then we ask them how many acres will be affected by activities you implement. So we always want to know, you know, under 1 acre, 1 to 2, so on and so forth. And you can get some numbers out of this. How much money have you saved? Do you think you might save over the next year? I mean, that's really getting out there. But, you know, there's a number of different questions here that I think that has some value. And then the most of value really is the questions in the back, or the comments. What kind of comments they had, because that really helps you think about the stuff that people want to learn, maybe for future trainings and stuff. You learn about your audience, basically. But you also get numbers in terms of the number of acres impacted and stuff like that. We did do a couple of follow-up surveys. We did the one that Andrew mentioned, but this was actually in 2015 of a number of folks who had gone through a number of workshops. I think it was 4 or 5. It said 3, but I think it was more than that. You know, we asked them what types of things that you do on your property over the last, I think it was like 6 months or 8 months. And as you can see, most of it was done with unpaid labor, building brush piles, wildlife food. And then you see the things they're willing to pay for, controlling invasive exotic species, and felling trees in the woods that might pose a threat to humans. You know, we just got some inklings from this, the types of things that people are willing to pay for, and the information that Andrew got was actually better. So, but basically we got some good information out there. Those follow-up surveys, again, tell us the kinds of things that people are doing, and things that you can use in your impact information. And again, 40% contacted a professional. 40% of those were arborists, and 20% were foresters. So it's that same trend we see, because people see arborists, they see landscapers. They don't. Most of them don't even know what a forester is. So in conclusion, I guess I could say workshops motivated almost all individuals to undertake activities. This is actually a summary of that specific survey. The other thing you can get out of this, if you can get the number of acres that people actually converted from lawn to natural area, there are formulas to say, what does that impact in nutrients, in nitrogen and phosphorus? You know, there's accepted formulas for converting lawn to natural area that says that it reduces nitrogen and phosphorus inputs by this much. People like water quality, stuff like that. It means a lot, especially a lot of organizations that may be less interested in other aspects of that. With that, the take-home points I have here is really just use a variety of formats to meet the needs of different audiences, get participants in small groups to map their property, and to leave the project with leave the workshop with a project idea. And you know, sometimes a 2-night, 1-week workshop is similar to a whole day workshop that you don't have to do on Saturday. It keeps coming up, right? And exit surveys were very encouraging. And I think the important thing to remember for those of us that work in forestry is that we're used to a lot larger numbers, you know? It's like, you have a client with, you know, a guy with 40, 50, a person with 40, 50 acres. Well, you know, these are smaller properties. So, you know, it's like you look at it and go, well, I affected, 70 acres after so many years, you know, or something. But those are, as Adam said, those are a lot of people, you know, recognize a lot of people. So with that, I will hand it over to Dave. He'll talk about Pennsylvania. You go, Dave.
Mike.
Yeah.
Oh, that's on already. All right, well, welcome everybody. I finally have a chance to say hello to everyone, so thank you all for being here. So again, I'm Dave Jackson, so I'm one of the forestry educators with Penn State Extension. So I'm a regional educator right out of the central part of the state and been with Penn State about 20 years now. I'm going to just kind of give you my perspective, and I know some others here. Julianne's here now, by the way, from Penn State Extension also. And Julianne has had some really good experiences with offering Woods in Your Backyard programs with Craig, and maybe Craig will talk about some of those, I think. And I think you already hit upon some of them even. So this is my perspective, really. So I started with this in 2013, and it really came about because we did regional landowner conferences annually, and then we consolidated that into one statewide landowner conference. And when we did that, I decided that I was going to try to take on this Woods in Your Backyard. And so we did those for a number of years here. I did them annually. These were full-day programs, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in detail. But I've also, I think the really neat thing that you can garner from Woods in Your Backyard is it fits so many different formats, and you're going to see that with what I've done and what the others have done already, because this is different than what Jonathan and Andrew already showed you. Workshops, field days, and then really where we landed now is with our webinar series, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more in detail with that as well. So a few faces there. There's Craig right there, one of our workshops on the Smith property. And that's, we've mentioned Jim Finley's name, so that's Jim. One of the original writers of the book. Jim has passed away now, but that was at one of our conferences that we would hold indoors. We would get 70 to 100 people at our conference, sometimes a little bit more for the Woods in Your Backyard stuff.
Yeah, but Dave, we could get 200.
You did, but you also had Doug Talmy at one of yours too, though. We only had Finley, see. Anyhow, so these were full-day Saturday programs, typically 9 to 4. We wiggled around a little bit on some of the format, how we ended on things, but I'll show you a typical agenda. But we had kind of a standardized format with our morning presentations, and where we had specific topics that we wanted everyone to see. And then the really neat thing about it in the afternoon is we were able to offer concurrent sessions where they could then pick from various topics what they wanted to attend. And sometimes we had 2, sometimes we had 3 concurrent things going on in different rooms. We did this in the forestry building on campus, so we could pick different classrooms that people could then go into. And you can change that up every year, and so you can keep mixing in new topics. We did everything from non-timber forest products to specific wildlife species. So there's just a whole plethora of things that you can really talk about with this kind of format. But But this is what we tried to cover every morning, that everybody stayed in the same room and got these, the introductory talk, why the woods in your backyard are important. The importance of woods to water, so we would always have a water specialist talk about, woods and water issues. We did the forest ecology, the soils topography, succession talk every time. And then Craig would always do the review of the book and how to get started with that plan and how to make the map of your property and things like that. So everybody went through those topics. And as we've already heard today, partnerships are really important with this, not only in the marketing part of it, but getting you through something like this. You have to build all those partnerships to get folks there and your presenters and so forth. And so we did a lot of work with Forestry for the Bay. Our local conservancy was really interested in woods in your backyard, county conservation districts, our Bureau of Forestry, Service Foresters, Game Commission, you name it, a lot of folks involved in getting these things to go. So this was a typical agenda for one of these days. So as I mentioned, these are standardized formats that we'd have everybody sit through in the morning, and then different concurrent sessions that we would do in the afternoons. We feed everybody lunch. You're charging a registration fee for this, covering your costs, etc. In the old days, we would actually create a brochure and do mailings and the whole 9 yards when we actually could do that. Now everything is done at Penn State Extension. It's all electronically. So we're not mailing anything. But if you do have partners that have, mailing lists and stuff, we were licking stamps and mailing this stuff out to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to get people to show up in the room. So I'm kind of liking the way we're doing it now, all electronic, believe me. So email systems work great. Facebook, posting things on Facebook. We do that with the webinar now. The workshops and field days, these are great, but you don't reach as many people. People aren't willing to travel. You're lucky if you're getting 50 to some of these things. 30 is probably more like it on a field day. In fact, we tried this just this last year, and our field day, some of them were as low as like 15 people up to 30 people. So not great attendance, but it's certainly a nicer format. You're out on the ground, you're in the woods, you're looking at lots of different practices, a lot more hands-on where people can really see what's going on. This particular one, we actually set stations around the property. Everybody got a map, and they had time to go visit the station that they wanted to go look at and learn about, and there was time for them to just wander the property themselves. We fed everybody lunch, and then they got to go look at more stations in the afternoon. So, getting tents and caterers and things like that all has to be built into your cost for what you're doing. And then you really keep your fingers crossed that it's not raining out that day because that'll be a disaster. But you can see even with this, though, what it does is it really lends itself to what the property has to offer. So you've got to find a cooperating landowner. Try to really find someone that's relatively small acreage, but sometimes you're on a larger acreage probably just because there's more things to show on some of the larger acreages. We would come up with themes depending on what the property had to offer, but they worked out really well. It's just that you're not reaching quite as many people to get them around a property like that. These are some of the brochures that we had, and so this was kind of our way to market things. Again, these were being mailed out typically, or attached to emails and sent out that way. A lot of the field days that we've moved to now really just these half-day Saturday mornings. So instead of going through all the logistics of trying to get everybody fed, etc., we're done at noon. So we're just a 9 to noon morning session, and typically we're just moving people around the property, looking at various things and talking about it, where we're just kind of handing the talk off to the next professional who's covering that particular topic and on that stop. So this is where we've landed now, is on the webinar series. And interestingly enough, we did this before the pandemic even hit. So this was kind of our first big try at doing webinars, believe it or not. And it was amazingly successful. We have had as many as 500 people register for our webinar series. And we just said, let's do it. We came up with a set format that we wanted to cover. It's 9 parts, so it runs for 9 weeks, starting in January right up into March. We do them in the evenings. So we have an hour presentation followed with 30 minutes of Q&A, and honestly, most times with the Q&A, we don't get to half the questions. There's so many questions that people have following each presentation. They're all recorded, and they all get the recordings afterwards. We get probably a little bit better than 50% of the registrants to attend each of our live sessions. So we get a lot of registrants, just not everybody showing up. I think a lot of people are busy. They get the recording, and most are happy with the recordings. What's that?
They get the book.
Oh yeah, they get the book. Yep, yeah. So the book is included. So this is Woods in Your Backyard. So the Woods in Your Backyard book is included with their registrations. We're charging $45 registration for the 9-part webinar series with the book. Okay, and we actually set up, like we're doing for this program, we set up a Google Docs site where we put lots of other resources for people to have access to. And the recordings are available for 6 months. So anybody wants the recordings later, they have a long time to even go back and view them. And partners, again, are really important. You know, marketing, I think right now is, we've just finished it up last week, actually, with Craig's last talk. But I think we're kind of starting to saturate the market a little bit, so we've got to find some new and more creative ways on how to get the marketing out there. And honestly, with all of this, is probably the most challenging thing that you will have is, I mean, it's a huge audience, as we've seen, but you got to find a way to reach them. I don't think you'll ever saturate the audience, but our marketing mechanisms are limiting, and so that's the really hard part. We're still at 300 this year, though, so we're still doing pretty good. We have 300 people registering for a webinar for $45. But partners are really important for presentations and the marketing part of it, as I mentioned. That's one of our flyers. So Facebook, posting on Facebook has gotten us some people as well. This is our agenda for it. So as I mentioned, 9 weeks, pretty set format. I'd be happy to share that with anyone that's interested in doing something like this. I think, you know, the difference, as you mentioned, with the online course is that it's, you know, on their own time. You know, with this, we decided we want to have that personal contact with the folks, so they see us on there live, they get to meet the presenters, they get to ask the presenters questions and really engage with them for that hour and a half. So a little bit different than the online course, the way that's run. I'll just show you some of the impact that we've had, because it does make a difference. And if impact is something that you need to garner, you know, you can get it from Woods in Your Backyard. People learn a lot, and people do a lot once they're done with these courses. So this is just for 2019 to 21. You know, over 1,272 registrants, and that's not counting the 300 that we've had this year. And so a lot of people that we reached, improved skill and ability to manage their property. You know, a lot of them indicate that they learned a lot, and their skill to actually go out and do things has really increased. Likelihood to implement practice, you know, at 58%. It's interesting, you know, the common theme I've heard today already is that people like that one right there, right? That's one they really latch onto, invasive plants. So most people said that's the one that they're going to tackle. I think you get a lot out of that one, but, you know, wildlife habitat's real important. Setting goals and objectives. Craig, you're right up there at the top with that one. Converting lawn, that's another biggie that people want to do. You know, so those are all topics that we're covering. And I think one of the things I'll mention too is that the webinars that we do not follow the book specifically. There's a few things that we cover that are directly out of the book, but it really is to supplement the book. So it's very different than probably the online course and how you guys have it. We're giving them additional information that's not necessarily covered in a chapter in the book. Probably the one we cover the most, though, is kind of the woodlot management with some of the principles of succession and things like that. We do cover that, but a lot of the stuff we do is not specifically out of the book. Change attitudes or perceptions about land management practices, 60%. Here's some of the things I said. To let things be messy and natural. We heard that today. Making a plan will help me focus my efforts. Had not realized how important the forests are to clean water. Invasive plants, a very involved process, better realization and understanding of the problem. I thought the best thing to do for our woods was to just let it be. Now I know we can do something to help the trees and the undergrowth. So these are direct quotes. I never wanted to use herbicides, but now I feel that I may use them sparingly but effectively. Land cannot manage itself due to deer and invasive plants. So we got some really neat comments and attitudes of what people thought, were really changed. I had an emotional attitude towards my property, and now it's more scientific. How about that one? So these are also some quotes that we have from folks. So in addition to that question, we asked just general comments, just anything you want to share with us about the course. And I'll just pull a few. These were from our most recent one. So I am making different decisions now. I'm enjoying the property even more. The course opened my eyes to more of the natural processes going on, understanding how a small property fits in the larger picture in terms of municipality and nature and habitat development. I'll just share two more. So the series made me think about what I want out of my 2-acre wooded property. What I want is for my grandkids to be able to explore the woods, examine dead and live trees, identify animals that live in the woods, play in the small creek on the property, etc. So kind of cool that even someone with 2 acres is even thinking, multi-generational here. Thought I was fairly knowledgeable, but this course opened my eyes to many new factors of land management. I would excitedly tell my wife, I love this one, I've got so much more work to do outside to manage this property better. Like, see ya, hon, go outside. What's that?
No more honey-do list.
Yeah, right. I'm going to the woods, bye. So that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions. So that's been my experience, but the webinar has been really good. And honestly, what we're trying to do now is supplement them with some field days, yep.
So for your webinar, you're using Zoom webinar rather than regular Zoom because the capacity of the number of people you have. What platform are you using for that?
So we use Zoom webinar, and with Penn State, we have 1,000 people capacity on all of our webinars, so yeah.
And do you pay for that? Is that a paid, is the
I'm sure the university does. It's one way or another. We don't pay for it now. We don't have to cover or recover any costs, I'll say, for that, yeah. Yep, so.
What's the capacity without the webinar version? Do you know? Does anybody know?
I don't, but the meeting is very challenging when you have everybody there with camera and voice that you got to keep muting. So I'm sure we've all had horrible experiences with that when you hear someone that doesn't have their camera muted or their mic muted. Yeah.
Remember the free square on your bingo card.
Yeah.
I'm sick and tired of Zoom.
All right. Anything else? And I'll turn it over to. Yeah.
Craig?
What do you charge for your full-day workshops on average?
Honestly, I don't recall. And when we were in that mode, it was strictly cost recovery. And so if I had a room rental fee, porta-johns, tents, lunch, I was simply adding that up, and I was trying to cover that cost. Now we're trying to cover a lot more than just cost because we are funding positions and everything with our programs, and that's why not a lot of costs in webinars, but we're charging $45 because that goes into a big pool at the university that covers a lot of things now. So. Yep.
When I used to do it, we would have to rent a room, maybe at a hotel or something like this, and we would have minimum $75, and this was at least 10 years ago. So it would probably be more now.
Yeah, and I was never that high. Yeah, I was never even near that for my full day programs. I was getting rooms for free.
Let's we're gonna have a little time for Q&A after this, so let's get Adam
let's
up
get
here.
Adam up here.
Craig.
Or Craig, we get Craig up.
Yeah, so I don't have a PowerPoint, but I would just add, I guess, to
Come
what
up
was
here.
already said.
Can you use that mic?
You want to use
Just
that one?
Oh, I can, sure. So I should sing a song.
Hey, door number one, or you want me to wash it? Or no.
No, so I mean, I've had like I said, to make these work, it's working with other people to do it, other agencies, just sitting down with it. I'm fortunate enough that I've run these workshops coordinated with the original authors of the book, Jim Finley to Adam and Jonathan. So it's cool that, and all their programs were different. you know, they had their different ways of implementing this stuff. The first one I ran was, when I first started, I think there was only 16 people. It was me and 16 people. I did on 2 evenings in Hartford County, Maryland, and I just presented everything. So, you know, it was my first foray into that. And I realized then, there's so many experts out there. Just bring people in. I think people are willing to present on this stuff, to organize and kind of think of it. So there's just a lot of different ways to do it. My most recent one was, we used a webinar to cover, 3 hours in the evening, and then the next Saturday we met all those people outside to do it. So that was a new way for us to do it. I've done it on the webinars. Just contact the local people in that area, wherever you want to try it. Within the book, what I emphasize is that forest succession, the forest ecology of everything that you're going to add in there. I always emphasize a good presentation on forest ecology, that succession, because everything you're going to do and recommend from that, you're just playing with the ecology. So emphasizing that kind of stuff. When you're planting trees, you're pushing, that forest succession forward. Or if you're harvesting, you're moving it back. So making people understand kind of the ecology of the forest. And people eat that up. They love that when they start hearing about how forests work. I use those Arnett slides, the slides that Jonathan was showing a lot. So I do emphasize everything that you're doing in there. If you base it on the ecology, I think that works. But that's pretty much what I can answer questions with the panel afterwards, but give time for Madam here.
By the way, this is for the recording, not so you can hear us. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. There's a multitude of ways to skin the cat, so to speak. I've done everything from multi-day programs to kind of once off as face-to-face, and partnered with these guys and doing some virtual. I have not done a blended one like you just mentioned, but I think that would could definitely work. Did you turn that light on there, Dave?
You don't have PowerPoint, so.
Yes, I do. I didn't want to be outdone by you completely. But I did want to go last so I could basically say what they said. The partners I always work with is the local Virginia Department of Forestry in my case. So I'm with Extension. I kind of do the coordination, recruit the speakers, do some of the delivery, but I lean on the local Virginia Department of Forestry for kind of that succession piece, chosen tree management, and then I also work with our local Department of Wildlife Resources, wildlife biologist person doing one of the wildlife talks. I often work with the local horticulture extension agent for the piece of converting lawn to natural area. That's a good way to engage that person into the program as well. And I usually do kind of the kickoff piece. And then, so for those of you in extension especially, who like, we get geeked out or pushed to do impact statements. So there's between impacts and outputs, we're not just looking at numbers. Yes, we're going to count how many people and how many acres. Those are outputs. We really want impact. What is it affecting? And so, similar to what Jonathan shared and Dave, in Virginia, in our case, over the years, so I've been doing this since 2007, 62% intent. So that is an exit survey, what you plan to do. Intend to do something. And that something, they checked one of the boxes and then 47% plan to convert excessive lawn to natural areas. I got a favorite quote too from someone who's, I think it was husband and wife who had the program together, and he couldn't make it back the second day. She came back and said, "You won't believe it. I've been trying to get him to stop mowing so much lawn, and now he's finally agreed." So it was like one of those things. But anyway, I've on occasion done some follow-up, like 3 months or so afterwards. Don't have the time availability to do that all the time, but it's good once in a while to see if intentions are actually translating to something. One thing we've done, similar to what Andrew described, is had people turn in their plan, and then they get entered into a drawing for a free kit, resource kit, a Doug Townley book and a mug and a hat or whatever. else I have that I can give away. So, let's see here.
I get my credit card taken away for doing that.
Well, you gotta be creative. So happy to share this impact statement. I don't know how other states kind of do their impact statement as far as its relevance, response, and results. And so I just updated this to add this piece to it as far as our response. So our first response to the issue initially was owners. Now we have this second component of the response to the green industry provider. So I do like these impact statements in that it kind of brings everything together into the so what. So I guess this was supposed to be a panel. We were supposed to share a little bit of differences, experiences, and delivery of this. And so any questions, comments, thoughts you have. You might have some ideas of even something different that you might want to try besides what we've described. So
Yeah, we are ready for any questions or that you might have.
I have a thought, because I'm
Good.
sitting here in my mind trying, how am I going to take it back home, and
Yeah.
how am I going to do that outreach is always my biggest. And I work with Firewise down in South Carolina, and we target high-risk communities. So I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, if you could do like a 40-minute teaser presentation, call an HOA, hey, your next annual meeting, can I pop in and do a 40-minute presentation on this, tease them, reel them in, and then say, okay, look, be looking for us if you want to sign up. We'll contact you when our program goes online or we're in person. But I think I have one community in mind that they would eat it up. And they've all got wooded natural areas. They're all about it. And that way, if you're thinking, fragmentation, at least your community, you've expanded. It's not one here, one over in that city. You're kind of targeting an area. So
It's a great idea, and I will say that there's some value to this being kind of a multi-state sort of thing. There's a book, there's blah blah. That makes it look like something, and so there's the offer of something like that. I think it may be more readily received without all the undergirding of these sort of things. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea to meet the HOA. We've done it 2 different times in West Virginia, and they've been community-based. One was a group of houses up on a mountain, so they called themselves the Woods up there. And so we just targeted that community. They had a good meeting place that we could do it, and it wasn't that large of a workshop. It was maybe 25, but it was everybody together. And then there was a retirement community also in West Virginia called the Woods, and we did a 2-part series with them. They were older, but we did one day just talking about the woods. We came back the next season and talked about creating more woods or more natural areas. But that's a great idea as a teaser. I think it's a good way to target.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just wondering if the core set of evaluation questions used across states is similar enough to allow for multi-state data aggregation, and this is a train-the-trainer session, so is there a proposed mechanism for that going forward?
I like your thinking. We can do it.
I don't think there has been, no. Yet.
No.
We haven't really, except in the case of we've put together some abstracts for professional associations.
Yeah, we've done ANREP.
A little bit of aggregation there, but not formally. It's a great idea. And that might be a follow-up.
Be a great RIA project. Honestly, probably would be. Yeah.
How about a couple of you mentioned maybe did a few during the day, during the weekday, morning thing, or for people who have families and they protect their weekends or stuff like that, or evenings, it's dinner time and kids and all that stuff. So have you had any success in that?
So we did 6 of them across the state just this last fall, so last year, that were Friday afternoons, and they didn't do very well. So we tried to do our Forestry Friday things, and I think, Scott, you had one. How many did you have up your way registered for it? You remember?
Well, I'm getting mixed up because we had the Get Out in the Woods thing too. We had 2 at one and 9 at another.
Yeah.
Katie had 4.
Yeah, so some didn't do very well, even with the marketing that we have to that existing list of 1,200 plus people. So we thought, here, we got 1,200 plus people that attended here, come to these Friday afternoon programs. The ones that I hosted were 15 and 30, so not great numbers. Good enough, but not great, really.
Yeah, actually, that was my idea. But,
We're still trying Fridays, but
not all ideas are great ideas.
yeah.
What about like midweek mornings, like 9 to noon, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or something like that?
Well, when I've done those type of programs, typically it's like master gardeners and programs. Usually, that's when.
Yeah, I've never tried it for Woods in Your Backyard. I don't think any of us have.
I mean, it's always possible. And I was thinking about this. You guys have expanded out a lot, but I mean, you could do something on photographing wildlife in your backyard. I mean, you could do all kinds of offshoots, the things that might be interesting. Yeah.
I think with our model, there was key things we wanted people to know, but then there were key things we wanted to bring them in and get them to attend, So,
Yeah.
So Dave, my question is for your program that you were coordinating. You had said that, I think it was you that had said that the programs that you were doing for your 8 or 9 week session, they were kind of accenting what was in the book. You didn't necessarily do exactly those topics. How did you encourage your audience to read the book? Like, was there some sort of encouragement, like, oh, this is going to be based on chapter da-da-da-da, we're enhancing this.
So Craig might want to answer, because really Craig wrapped it up where he came back at the end, the last session, and we introduced it with Allison, who's similar to what you saw here, but then Craig finalized it with the workbook. And so maybe, Craig, you can.
Yeah, I mean, you just emphasized that this book is a management plan. So this is your management plan. Encourage people to go through the activities. And what I compared it to is just a typical forest management plan that a forester would write. But letting them know this is it, coming up with goals, and then going through the activities. When you're done, you have your management plan. So that's, I guess, emphasizing everything from that book, including page number when we went over, this is on this page, this is this activity. So.
And that was at the end, that part, this is this activity, okay, where the rest of it was just.
Yeah, and specifically, we did not encourage them through, we encouraged them, but there was nothing specific that said, go read chapter so-and-so, it coincides with this evening, so we did not do any of that, Agnes. It was all additional. Yeah.
Somebody else, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh.
Anybody else want to go?
Yeah, go ahead. Front there.
Up front.
Has anybody ever attempted to adapt this to a younger audience or maybe even families?
I always thought this was a really good project, would be a good project with us for a school teacher, for school grounds. This isn't just about landowners, it could be somebody who manages land as well. And I always thought this would be a great project for a class. We've had a couple, well, what about the one who took the online course from the, I forgot about that.
Yeah, we had a session several years ago where a school had a group of 5 teachers who said, we want to transform our campus. And what they decided to do was say, okay, we've got all this grass over here, we want to convert it. They took it to the school management, and then school management said, no, you can't, that's the septic field. So they said, okay, well, let's look around. What's over there? They didn't realize they had a stream running the edge of their property, so they concentrated their efforts over there. This was a group of 5 teachers, 2 English teachers, 1 French teacher, and 2 biology teachers. So it was multidisciplinary. We haven't had anything like that, but we have had a pretty decent response in the online course from younger families, because some of them are new to land ownership. The kids are not quite out of school, but they're 40s and 50s. They're not 60, 70, 80 retired with lots of money to spend. So in that case, there's that connection there. But we haven't done anything to specifically target these folks. But
So I think
they're an untapped audience.
I think the other audience here would be also like the homeschooling audience.
I would say Project Learning Tree, if you're familiar with that one. So it doesn't get into land management, but it at least covers the basic topics. So I think that's already written, I guess, for a younger audience. It might be interesting to then tie into the land management and things you can do to Project Learning Tree.
Yeah, and I'll add, with Craig, I remember 2 activities that Craig did specifically that you could easily do for young kids, and actually we've done them for young kids. And I remember Craig standing right in the stream, catching macroinvertebrates and talking about water quality with our adult audiences. And I remember Craig with a butterfly net in the lawn, catching no bugs and walking out in the meadow and catching 100 of them. And he always would turn the net over and okay, everybody ready? Let's see how many bugs come out of this net, And everybody's leaning over the net looking at it.
I was a middle school teacher at one point.
Yeah, I mean, those are, so Woods in Your Backyard, I think it lends itself to kids, and I would use the same title because they would connect to those kinds of things, wildlife, insects, water quality, macroinvertebrates, all that would apply.
My patent approach to kids is, do you like bugs? And then I got a bunch of bugs that have been captured over the year, because they wear them out every year. You got to get new bugs.
Funny thing about that.
But taking that to this, forum, it'd be a great tagline to interest a kid in this kind of a thing.
Well, and it ties right into Doug Talmey's work with non-native plants, and not being able to provide enough insects for birds and et cetera. So yeah, it's a big theme, yep.
I think you're spot on with this with the children's education, and there's also the Association for Environmental and Outdoor Education that harvests the green schools, and they would all be probably jumping on this if they could, tie this into the curriculum.
I remember contacting them at one point years ago when I was really started on this. But yeah, you're great. You just have to move it along, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons we're doing this workshop, so you guys can go and tap that audience. Some people here are ready to retire.
Yeah, some of us not soon enough.
9 days.
9 days, are you kidding?
I'm curious to hear, it sounds like the online stuff has been really successful for you guys, Dave, and also Andrew, the course, Canvas course. Could you guys, as far as you know about each other's programs, maybe describe the pros and cons of the webinar series versus a more formal Canvas approach, and sort of say which one you like, or I don't know.
Well, I'm sure he's going to say he likes his, and I'm going to say I like mine. I like mine because it follows the book. I don't want to say I'm a purist, but there's a lot there that I think needs to be directed to. One of the things I like about theirs is that it complements what we do. We don't compete. We've had people from his course come to, his webinar series come to my series, and vice versa. I've had people attend both, consecutively. They'll say, okay, his just finished up, now I'm coming to yours, because we do a lot of cross-advertising. So I think both fill a particular niche. Some people are willing to make a 10-week investment in mine, other people are a 9-week investment in theirs. Some people don't have the time to do everything all at once, or carve out, one of the things that Jonathan and I were doing with these evening chats, and last spring I had a woman participant write to me and say, does it have to be at 7 o'clock? That's when I put my baby to sleep. Can I come in, at 7:20? Sure, come and join us at 7:20, or watch the recording later on. We're flexible. That's one of the great things about this. You can really adapt it to all sorts of different audiences.
This may not sound great, but the reason we did our webinars is because it would take us years to build a course like Andrew did, which we thought about doing, but wheels turn slowly when you have to spend that amount of time at your desk building all of those units. And we said, man, we could do a webinar easy. We got it done already, so that's why we landed on the webinar. I mean, I don't know, Sarah, maybe you can mention a little bit what we're doing now, because I think we have a Woodland Stewards course that has set format just like your online course, but I think ultimately what we want to do is supplement that with other live presentations, to add to it. So I think combining the two formats might really be the best way to go, but it takes a huge amount of time commitment to put something like that together.
I would just, before you say anything, I'll just add on that with the course that Andrew's done, we've added a lot of these other extra videos and a lot of other resources around it. So it's not like the short videos we've done and things like that as well.
So I was thinking, I've worked in Canvas, sorry.
Well, Sarah was
Sarah was
gonna,
gonna-
you want to mention?
Oh, yeah, the format that Dave's describing is we have an online course that exists as an asynchronous course already. And we don't get Canvas because we're not as cool. But we use edX, which is a similar platform structure. So we still offer that asynchronous course, but we also offer a cohort to go through asynchronously scheduled. They still learn on their own, but they come to webinars as like a check-in session where they can do that dynamic Q&A aspect and kind of reinforce some of the concepts. And also, we set that up as a discussion for the cohort. They learn from each other. They talk about their own properties and what they're doing. And so that's the kind of thing, like, we can't put that in a course. They have to create that for each other. So that same cohort goes through the whole deal together. And they build like a mapping project, like what's described in the book here.
So that was my experience in building that course and my decision to not build another course for Woods in Your Backyard, because it took a lot of time to do that. And so,
Once the course exists,
thumbs up for what you.
take it to that, to add in the live component if you want, to make it that like dynamic aspect.
Yeah,
The building of the course is the one.
Yeah, so if you want to dream big, Luke, I think that, honestly, from what my experience has been, would be the best of both worlds, so that you have the live interaction, maybe supplementing material with the offline, do this chapter on your own and work your way through that.
Take a village.
It takes a village, yeah.
Ohio State there.
Thinking that,
Yeah.
I've used Canvas to build several hybrid type courses before.
Uh-oh,
Is there a
don't
way
let them
since
find out.
Woodland already has theirs set up, could we get like maybe the HTML code and then set up a course in like Ohio State system? Or we just copy and paste that and then it's already done, we just need to upload the
Yeah,
photos?
absolutely. Give me your contact information, and I can let you be an observer on our course. And if there's anything in particular, I can share whatever you want with it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We've done something like a hybrid style with our Pastures for Profit and Forages for Horses courses, where we've had live Zoom webinars. We have set schedules for those, and then we have additional material that we just kind of work through. And that's gone over actually pretty
Yes, I
well.
think that's amazing.
Call it Woods for Weirdos.
Speak for yourself.
Like that.
What time are we supposed to finish?
Okay. I have a
4:15.
que-
Okay.
I hope this is not, for this, just tell me. I'm really interested in following the money on this stuff. Obviously you're doing programs fairly at cost, okay, and with any level. So I want to know where's the funding? Is this all state funding? I mean, can you just give us a little bit of a financial history and background of what the programs are?
So, yeah,
I can start by being real quick in Virginia. When we deliver a program, it's just to cover the cost. So that does not account for the grants and stuff that Jonathan got to develop the content, the material. But we don't have a line item in my county budget or state budget or whatever. We just make it happen.
Yeah, for mine, I'm funded by a U.S. Forest Service grant that I apply for every year. So part of that is education and outreach, so I have some funding to do that, cover my time.
And since I'm Maryland.
I guess I have occasionally gotten sponsors.
Oh, okay.
Not all the time, but sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, a portion of my salary is paid for by federal grants.
Okay.
And part of it is state money.
yeah, so,
Thank you.
Yeah.
so like, the payment for this to do a lot of the outreach and the development was, done off of grants. So the paying for this is a grant from the Hughes Center for Agroecology out of the University of Maryland. So very farsighted, and happy they were willing to bet on us. And we've more than met the requirements. In fact, we have a good bit of money left over to do an experiment, to do some other things like this. And the other thing I'll mention, it's in process as well, is, it's gonna be a little bit, but the Woodland Health Practices Guide, which we're gonna shift to here in a minute, we're looking at making that into a little pocket guide real pocket guide. So taking most of the stuff that's in the land care practices section, it'd be something that workers or a landowner could use, like the real basics about how do you do this. It's a picture, a little bit of text, and a kind of a guide you can give to somebody.
Thank you.
So I'll just mention that our official online courses that we have at Penn State, their prices are set by our marketing folks and by looking at comparable items that they find elsewhere, kind of seeing what the market will bear. I think personally they're a little overpriced. Our specific programs, like I showed you, workshops, conferences, the webinars, we as county-based educators have the option to set that price. You know, typically it's cost recovery, but now we are trying to cover a little bit more than that to ultimately funding positions, you know, with the pool of money that gets accumulated across the state.
So on that, I think we're gonna call this to an end and switch gears a little bit. So we've kind of, you know, gone through the guide, right? The self-assessment guide. That's where we are. And before we finish today, and we don't have to make this, you know, real.
I'm gonna put this on.
Oh, I'm sorry. We don't have to make this real developed. We just wanted to kind of give a little background here, right, Dave, on the.
I have a couple slides I want to show
Oh, okay.
when you're done.
Okay. So we're at 415, challenges finding natural area management service providers for small acreage property owners. And I could have some slides, but what I would say is that really the impetus for thinking about this whole service provider idea was, and looking at the arborists and the green industry, arborists and landscapers, and some foresters were interested, was just some of the follow-up surveys we got in terms of where people went to for a service provider. And as some of the stuff you saw already showed, you know, 40% or so, and actually we had even higher numbers than that, you know, 50 to 70% of people were contacting an arborist or somebody in the green industry. They weren't contacting foresters. And so we started thinking, well, of course, that kind of makes sense. These are residential properties where, you know, and the landscapers and arborists are working on these properties. And is there a way to make this work such that the thing that's lacking really, I think, is the knowledge of how to do these woodland practices. And herbicides, the use of certain herbicides, and how to control invasives, and, you know, what time of year, the timing that can be done, and so much, things like that. So that's what really gave me the idea to this, and to apply for a grant to get this funding to do this training for service providers. And getting the group of folks that you saw here today together with this partnership, we sat down and started, you know, coming up with these ideas, and went through a number of meetings and a number of ideas on, you know, how we were going to do this. And it, you know, just seemed to happen to come together. And it was the same type of process in some ways from the first book, where, you know, you start off with this big, large number of, a lot of content. And you have to dwindle it down to what it is that people want to know. But I mentioned this earlier, the real thing is that having worked somewhat with the arborist and landscaping industry, you know, it's an industry where people, if they're not making money at it, they're not going to do it. So, in some ways, that's a little bit different than some of the forestry programs that are out there. You know, you have a lot of state foresters and this and that. But so we had to really look at how they could see this as an income-making opportunity. You know, a lot of this invasive control and other things, chosen tree management, that's stuff that can be done in the winter. And they can also offer their client this whole idea of a sustainable landscape, and this whole idea of forest health, kind of focusing around the idea of forest health, you know, and what does that mean, you know? And to do that, we developed the two publications, this checklist, which is at the back of the Woodland Hand Practices Guide, and the guide itself. So, and I'm going to let Dave talk about those things, but the idea kind of just like, you know, fermented a little bit and kind of grew kind of organically from our conversations. And we actually, the checklist was developed from a product that was done by an extension agent in New York, Cornell. What was her name? She's noted in the publication. But she had done something similar for, pardon me?
Christina?
Was it Christina? think it was.
The resiliency
Yeah, the resiliency scorecard. So we actually started with something like that. We made all these changes to it to adapt it to what we thought was our audience. And I made a number of presentations to a lot of the arborist meetings around the state pesticide recertifications. And a lot of people were very interested, and that kind of helped to kind of get the idea out there. And from that, you know, we developed publications as well as the training that came afterward, which you'll hear about, you know, a little bit later. So.
I just want to emphasize that one of your techniques was kind of one of your suggestions. You went to pesticide certification meetings, and he did like an introduction to the program. I think he took maybe a half hour, 40 minutes, and he went to other International Society of Arboriculture, and he did what you had suggested, a 30, 40-minute kind of pitch.
Yeah.
So he really worked, like he hit the pavement, you know what I mean, to advertise for it within the community.
Well, we just wanted to see if there was interest, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. And there was interest. So with that, I think I'm going to just want to do a brief introduction, because what we want to finish up today after Dave talks a little bit about the publications is have Julianne and Agnes are going to kind of go through a little bit on the checklist, okay? Yeah, no.
I'm just going to give you a quick intro on these two pieces. So, you know, interestingly enough, I think it was in the back there, maybe you said this morning that, you know, to a question to Allison, you know, how do we make people aware of all these service providers that are out there? And honestly, in my mind, I'm thinking there aren't service providers out there. I think more often than not, then I struggle just the opposite, that for small acreage owners, I don't have service providers for those folks. You know, I'm not going to visit every 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 acre property that contacts me. My service forester's not going to those folks. And if it's in the natural areas, neither are the landscapers or the arborists, right? They're working in the lawn, right? They're working in the manicured area. So that was the whole impetus of this, is how do we train folks to serve these people with these small acreage lots to actually go into the woods and do management in their natural areas, you know, in the wooded areas. And so that's what we hope to achieve with these. And this was really the idea, expand woodland health services to, I'll say, small acreage landowners, right? Because the private consultants are working with the large acreage owners, and then increase income and services offered by green industry professionals. And so really focusing on how do we train landscape folks, how do we train arborists and others in the green industry to provide services that aren't being provided currently to these small acreage people. And so we wrote the book and the assessment here, and I'll show you each of those. So that was where we formed the partnership that we've already mentioned, Maryland Extension, Penn State, the Alliance for Chesapeake Bay, Virginia Cooperative Extension, and then we'll meet the other partner tomorrow from the Department of Forestry. And as Jonathan mentioned, it was funded by that grant there from the, what is it, the Harry Hughes Foundation, Jonathan?
Harry Hughes Center for Agroecology.
All right, there you go. And so this is our tagline for the book. It's a practitioner's guide for creating, enhancing, and maintaining natural areas. So this is for the practitioners, or as Jonathan pointed out earlier, this could also be for the do-it-yourselfers, you know, people that want to really learn and just go out and do it. So 85 pages, full color. The 10 authors are listed, 5 chapters, and Adam's going to go into more detail tomorrow for you on what is actually in the book. And of course, you do have a copy of it yourself. But really, one purpose is to help green industry professionals develop new business opportunities and improve woodland health. So we want them out there working in the woods. It is for sale. We have that on the Penn State Extension website. It's $15, just like the Woods in Your Backyard book. So if you get on our site, just put in the title in the search bar and you'll land on it. There are shipping costs. You can order any quantity that you want and they will ship them right to your door. And it seems like they've gone up pretty quick, because I know when, I think it was Agnes, you ordered them, you got them pretty quickly, or Jonathan, no, when you ordered these ones, you got them like within a week, right?
Next day.
Yeah. There you go. Well, I don't always promise that, but they did come pretty quick. I was surprised, so good.
Avoid the Christmas time area.
Yeah, right. And so we're going to cover this in a lot of detail here with Julianne and Agnes here in the next session, but I'll just mention a few things. So it is a checklist with associated management action. So it's a planning tool. It really is the first tool that we'd expect the green industry professional to walk through the property with the landowner potentially or by themselves and be checking these boxes, say, okay, this is an issue, this is good, this is just fine where it should be, this is a real major concern. How are we going to address some of these things with the management actions that are adjoining with what their concerns? This is not on Penn State's website. This is a free downloadable PDF on the Maryland Woods in Your Backyard page, and so that's where you would find that. Okay, so you have to kind of keep track of where the different things are available. Maryland has a great site that Woodland site there has tons of resources on it for woods in your backyard. They just don't sell the 2 books there is basically what it amounts to. And so here's how it works here. There's 4 different sections in the assessment tool. Okay, and they look at 4 different things: woodland diversity and composition, woodland structure, habitat assessment, and then site level considerations. And for each one of those things, there's a number of different topics that you can check whether it's a high concern, medium or low concern as far as there being an issue there or not. And each checklist item that you have has the suggested management actions on the opposing page. So as you open it up, you can see the checklist with the management actions right adjacent to it. So here's just an example so you kind of see how it works, and then we'll get you out and we'll really talk about how to use it. So this is just one of the habitat assessment items in the checklist there. So deer browsing, and it kind of gives you a description, what are you seeing out there? If it's on the high end of the scale, if it's on the low end of the scale, here's what you might be seeing. And basically, you're to check where that particular property lands on that scale. And then you would look at the management actions. And so this would allow them to say, okay, based on what I'm seeing as far as its concern level or its issue level, here's some of the things that then I would recommend to the homeowner to do. And, it might include, harvesting, could be installing fences, leaving tops on the ground, maintaining or creating areas of early successional habitat that create additional browse. So there's some things that are suggestions there, and there's a whole bunch of these items for each one of those 4 categories. And so that's all I'm going to say, unless there's questions. And if Agnes and Julianne, I don't know if you want to introduce anything in here for your next session here. Or do you have a question back here?
Yeah, do you have any potential of putting out a translated version of this in Spanish? That's mainly what I'm dealing with in the DC region. Most of the companies that would be using this would be.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, we had a long topic about that, and I don't know where you landed with that, translating these tools to Spanish, Jonathan.
Well, we were talking about with the pocket guide, developing the pocket guide in English, and then seeing about possibly translating that into Spanish. Not this.
Yeah, where we see, that's right, that's where we land. So where we saw them is really with the practices, where we're making that more abbreviated pocket guide version that you'll be able to bring right out in the field with you, and having that in the Spanish version as well. So that might be something that you'll find helpful. But I don't think it was the checklist. We kind of envisioned the checklist being something that the company owner might be the one actually walking through that with the landowner themselves, actually talking about these different issues on the checklist.
Okay.
And it really was a start to get them to get a management plan for the property.
Okay, so Julianne, I know you can come up and start. You're going to go through the checklist, okay, in a little more detail.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If you're walking through the woodlands with
You're going to come up here?
a landscaper, is it to give advice or to educate the landscaper for what the ecology looks like?
So our vision was that the landscaper is trained, and I'll talk more
Julianne,
tomorrow about the trainings that we've offered, because there's a whole nother opportunity for you with this material to train the green industry professionals. And so our idea would be that they've gone through training. Now they're the ones working with the landowners.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the way it's going to work is tomorrow, folks are going to go over, this is the last activity for today, but just to kind of expose you to the checklist, and then tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, you know, we're going to meet.
I'm retired, remember?
I know.
Crack of noon then. We'll be, yeah.
You can show up with your eyes closed.
Meet behind the Outback there and kind of, you have copies of the checklist.
Yes, I have copies of the checklist, and you'll see me there, kind of at the edge of the parking lot. You'll know what I mean, kind of at the beginning of when we walk there. You'll walk towards not the highway, the woods, and
we'll see you. You
you'll see me
can't miss
there. I'll
anybody
be
there.
standing there because I'm going to walk us through a little bit to get.
How do you tell if it's on?
It's on.
Okay.
Not ideal, but it's interesting. You know, we're going to work with what we got. Is that when we're meeting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning? We're meeting tomorrow at 8 o'clock behind the Outback Steakhouse. Okay. Yes. I don't think steak is on the menu for breakfast, though, so don't get your
No.
hopes up.
Okay. You can turn the lights down.
Actually, can you give me a signal for 5 o'clock? Okay. So I'm going to do a case study so that you can actually, in your mind, envision how you might use this checklist. Oh, first of all, I'm Julianne Schieffer. I cover the southeast region of Pennsylvania. Okay, thank you. And it's where everybody seems to live in Pennsylvania. So, and they're willing to pay for things. So I can charge almost, hundreds. And they'll pay, and we're still cheaper than some of our competitors, a lot of our competitors. But anyways, so I'm a board certified arborist. I am that audience, that green industry, but I was trained as a forester, so I can talk both languages. And so Dave went through some of the things. I want you to go through the Woodland Health Practices Handbook and go to page 79. And you will see the checklist, and we will quickly page through it on screen with a sample case study. So first of all, you're going to be doing this for every different woodlands on the property. And our case study, we will have 2 different ones. So you'll have the regular information that you customize for that. And because you can download this and print it, you can do a assessment checklist for every part of that property that is different. So as Dave had pointed out, there's that, it's really easy. You go, I don't like what I see here. That might be a higher concern. Lower concern, and it's not showing up well here, but red is higher concern, red is alert, and lower concern is actually colored green, as you can see in your checklist. Yellow is, okay, caution, maybe this could change to the worse, or we could still change it for the better. Okay, it has those 4 different divisions there. And under that, there are categories of checklists. And it describes what you're looking for. That's the beauty of it. So even if you aren't a trained forester, you can say, I am looking for invasives in this. Oh, I am looking for deer browse. I am looking for, and then on the other side of that page, now it's a little bit different because this is the one in your handout, but the other side will have those management actions. That's the beauty of that too. So even if you're not a trained forester, you can get some ideas based on what you check. So here we go. Here's our sample property, and the Smiths own it. Of course they do. Smiths own a lot of things. And there's 8 acres, so definitely small woodland. 3 acres of them are young woods, 2.5 acres are mowed lawn, 1.5 acres is mature woods, 1 acre is old pasture. So I'm going to do the checklist on the young woods, but we also would use the checklist on the mature woods, because that would have different practices, different categories, different assessment, okay? And mowed lawn and old pasture, well, there is no checklist for that, okay? That's where, depending on the homeowner's needs, you might be wanting to convert lawn to habitat. That's what a lot of people seem to be doing, okay? Note, we have a stream. Oop, and I am not getting our arrows. So the stream is running through, and because I do want to address the stream in my checklist, I am going to add it in for the young woods just so that doesn't get lost. So we've got pole-sized trees. They're smaller growing, of course. So the client, the Smiths, they want less lawn to mow. I'm hoping most people want that. Healthier trees in wooded areas, okay? Manage and control invasive plants. Reducing deer impacts. Improving habitat for songbirds and pollinators. Pollinators is one of the new choice words these days. And trees and shrubbery can do a lot for that. Improving stream water quality and habitat. These are pretty educated folks. They're realizing that their little bit of land, 8 acres, still can have an impact on a larger whole with stream quality. Okay, so here's our sample 3 acres young woods. And it happens to be early successional red maple and red cedar. Okay, that's all we're seeing there. So that would be an area of concern, because we only have, with woodland diversity and composition, when we're looking at plant diversity and desirability, it definitely has low tree species diversity in the canopy and throughout the forest. The edges tend to be the red cedar. The older area, well, older, it's all a young woods, but the interior parts are tending to be red maple. So, next category, tree health. Well, it's doing pretty well. Those of you closer to the screen are maybe noticing there's a lot of invasives. Maybe you're even good enough to tell which invasives those are. So, the trees actually have, since it's going on form and health, with form, vigor, and things like that, it's medium concern. They're doing okay, they have good form, it's crowded, and there's invasives, which we'll address later, but some things with the density could be done to improve the overall health of those trees. Okay, insects and disease. We saw none. There aren't any ash here. There aren't any elms here. There aren't any things that are getting hit. So far, so good. Okay, so that's a green category. All right, woodland structure. That's our second grouping. And if we look at structural diversity, where the woodland contains trees that are primarily a single age and relatively uniform in size, creating a single canopy layer, that definitely describes this area. They're pretty much even aged, and as we know in all populations, whether it's wildlife or humans, you want a mix, a diversity of ages. So different sizes and ages, we're just not seeing it. We are not seeing that overstory, understory layers either, because it's mostly invasives, and we will find out a little bit later, it's extensively browsed. This is something that in our trainings have gathered a lot of interesting comments, because they go, you sure we want these dead trees standing up? I mean, we can understand maybe some dead trees down, but standing up, aren't they going to fall on us? Aren't they, yes, there could be liability. Don't leave your dead trees closer to the path if there is a path. But they ultimately will be recommending 2 snags per acre. Okay, that's what the recommendations will be later on. But we've got a few snags, a few of those red maples are dead, some of those red cedars might be going. What you'll find is when you have a tree that is vertical, it attracts an entirely different type of insect population as well as wildlife. To the extent that I, who live in the middle of town, take trees and mount them upright, dead trees upright. So I have my own snags. And then eventually when they rot out enough, they fall over, then I have my deadwood, which is the next category. So they were saying, don't we want to clean up those woods? That's what some of our participants said. And we were like, okay, no. One, the deadwood on the ground, and I'm speaking to the choir, the deadwood on the ground acts like a sponge. It keeps moisture in there. It has incredible habitat potential for amphibians, and it can trip up the deer if you have too many of them and you leave down tops, for example, when you do cuts. Okay, so we're going to say there's enough downed and dead wood, yay. Not large logs, but we have enough for that forest condition. Okay, looking at woodland structure again, tree crowns and spacing. So that's when you're starting to look up. We've been looking down, we've been looking across. Looking up, we're going to be looking at the crowns, and they are, as we mentioned before, pretty dense. So they have small crowns, they're overcrowded, they're competing for growing space. Not enough light is reaching the forest floor, because what do we have? We have bush honeysuckle, which loves shade. We have grapes, which can tolerate shade. We have things that, so it's a medium concern. We can do something about this. Going into habitat assessment, and you'll notice that a lot of the property owners, they will really focus on habitat. They want to see wildlife. They want to encourage living with other things. So, since this is early successional, and we describe what the successional stages look like, and especially with this picture here, we're about right here in the stage of the forest. So it's more of an early area, and it is a higher concern. So we're eventually going to want to diversify the ages of the species and do some other things. Okay, edge habitat. Remember I mentioned there's red cedar on the edges? Okay, interior is more red maple. It doesn't have a soft edge. It's more of a, by the one property map I showed, they're mowing up to the edge and it's straight. So they only have things like red cedar on those edges. It could work, you could work with roughening up that edges, putting a shrub layer along there that would introduce other wildlife species and more natives, things like that. So we're checking that as medium. Okay, those good old undesirables. Oh, they're there in spades. There's only 3 of them: bush honeysuckle, grapevines, and porcelainberry. Grapevines, they're native, aren't they? But what happens when you have them like this? Grapevines will tend to be they are. as their plant growth description is, they are crawling along, and as soon as a tree roots up, they will hitch onto that and they will ride it. They're a hitchhiker type of vine. So you will soon get masses. They can start pulling down trees. They can start changing how a tree moves so that you can get more breakage, things like that. So we have to maybe watch that. Okay, deer. Anywhere you see lots of plants just nipped off straight, we don't have an understory. We've already acknowledged that. We have very little shrub layer. It's mostly invasives. And then we spot a deer, or we spot areas where they're actually bedding down. Okay, looking for those, looking for scrapes and rubs and deer trails, things like that. So we know this one's heavily impacted. And we have no regeneration. There are no small seedlings coming up. Absolutely none. What has happened is probably the deer have nipped those that have gotten through the invasives. In small little areas, we have actually hay-scented fern. Another native. But it has no wildlife value, and it is what they call allelopathic, in that it will send out chemicals that prevent other trees from growing in. Okay, so we note that. There's space for that. And site level things are easy enough. If you have access in, like some of the properties here in Pennsylvania, they're on mountainsides and it's very difficult to get in. I'm sure you run into that in your areas too. But this one can walk right in, easy trails. And then our stream side looks like this. We want it to look like that. Okay, that good old messy. And the more that we start planting riparian buffers along there, the more it will level out that stream area and make that healthier for both wildlife habitat as well as stream water quality. Okay, so right now, bad stream side quality. And then we have a vernal pool. And those frogs are peeping right now as we speak. I'd be ecstatic if I was that homeowner, but that's me. So we have this vernal pool, yay. It looks like it's a functional one, but it's surrounded by young red maples. What did I do? And not any shrub layer. So the healthiest actually will have those overstory layers and all the layers that a normal forest. Okay, so that's kind of a medium. That's what we're going to consider for that, for the wetland. We could put more vernal pools in. Those are sometimes a little bit easy to do by just taking shallow scoops. The last site level is topography, and as I mentioned, it was level. Okay, we're not going to do the checklist on our 1.5 acres of mature woods, but suffice to say, it's going to be very different. Okay, just is. So that's why you do a different checklist assessment. So I just want to mention that. You do it for everyone. So our next steps are going to be matching up the landowner goals with what we found in our checklist. And Dave did a pretty cool way of having the checklist with right away picking out the management things, but I'm going to just let you know what those goals are again, and I'm going to pull out all those areas of red concern, higher concern, and the yellow. If it's lower concern, that property owner is doing great. So here are our choices. And it doesn't show as well as I had hoped, but I had bolded those things that could apply under woodland diversity and composition with plant diversity and desirability. So they could plant in different things, use chosen tree management. They don't need to harvest canopy trees because there really aren't any in the same way. Chosen tree management would work much better. And removing less desirable species, well, it's all red maple. That's a little bit less desirable. So we'll start creating openings. And then, of course, reducing deer impact, but we'll also address that later. So some of these management options are going to be the same under other assessment categories. General tree health. Well, we're medium there. So we could thin trees or release chosen trees, okay? Again, same management as before. Okay, it's not a mature woodland, so we would just consider removing by felling, harvesting, or what we call a timber stand improvement, TSI, felling, harvesting, or creation of those wildlife trees by just girdling them and letting them stand. Here, a little bit more skill is needed, and we describe that in the land care section. So you work with a professional forester to create canopy openings in certain areas, okay? And so that'll lead to different sizes and ages and start making that layers of a healthy forest. Okay, all right, those dead snags. We want an average of 2 per acre. Okay, so we have 3 acres. So we want about 6 of them scattered throughout that area. We want to use those trees that we have chose and left to become some of the larger and more mature sizes. We might also want to start allowing for, hopefully, because our mature woods happens to be oak and hickory, hoping that's because it's so close that there's some regeneration that we can protect or move over there. Okay, and then it says how you might want to create your snags. Then looking at woodland structure, again, it's chosen tree management by releasing the crowns at least 3 sides around it. So that's looking up and assessing the light and choosing your tree removals based on that. Again, habitat assessment, okay, successional stages, how do you address that? Okay, stop mowing some lawn areas and agricultural fields. That's probably how we got our young woods to begin with. Maintain those old field areas and see what they come up in, and keep at the invasives, okay? So when you have less than 10% of any one invasives, it becomes worth your efforts to remove them physically, by chemically, manually, even brush hogging with different things at that stage before they overtake everything. Okay, we don't have a mature woodland area, so that's not bolded. And create and maintain wide travel paths to reduce exposure to ticks. Or you just check your animals all the time and check yourself if you don't want to widen things. But when you think about it, ticks are wildlife. Okay, so habitat assessment, edge habitat. So if you want to cut edges in or create a diversity, allow them to revert naturally. I mentioned about that shrub layer. It mentions more in our book, planting desirable trees and shrubs to soften that area. Helps. Deer browsing. Have a deer harvest, invite all your friends, have them set up in the woods at different times, different places, not at the same time, hopefully. Installing fences, tree shelters, and other physical barriers. So some of my communities have worked really hard to do this. And one of the more interesting ways of using the tree shelters is, you know those giant bags of dog food? They cut it in half, they turned it inside out, and they stapled it on their tree stems at that certain time of year. Instead of going out and buying the tree tubes or some of the other things. And so I watched this, because there's quite a deer population here, and sure enough, those trees didn't get browsed. And it was used for one season, and then they'd take it off. But evidently the smell of the dog food, the smell of everything there was enough to keep them away. Okay, leaving the tops, tripping up those deer, help protecting tree seedling regeneration, maintaining or create areas of early successional young forest habitat to provide sufficient forest. Well, we already have that. So we might actually not want to, I would actually unbold that. Okay, tree seedling, retaining trees of desirable or less common species in the overstory. We may need to plant those in because we really want more than red maple. Controlling competition from undesirable tree or shrub species in the understory, or restricting recreation or management activities that have potential to damage. So I have noticed having the competitive frisbee destroys forests. Some of the parks that I have worked with the counties, I was assessing their forest before this checklist came along, and right before my very eyes, one of the frisbee golfers snapped all these twigs so that he had a clear view to the basket. I was like, hey, you know, but what do you do? Okay, eliminate mowing to the stream banks where we have that stream side quality, because we wanted to address it somewhere in our assessment. And seed or plant appropriate native plants, trees, or forbs in the stream buffer areas. It does help to at least stop mowing to that edge. And I want to say, although we say 25 feet, that's what the minimum in a lot of our communities address. What Stroud Water Research Labs have stated is they found actually 100. 100 is ideal, according to their research. So plant or enhance existing vegetative buffers around wetlands and vernal pools. So you have that vernal pool in your little young 3-acre forest. What shrubs could go around that would tolerate that shade? Spice bush would be an excellent one. And maybe you'd be lucky to get the spice bush moth, which is endangered. Okay, how about black haw, type of viburnum? That can take it. How about musclewood? That can take, you know, these are some of those shade-tolerant species. Leaving leaf litter, vegetation, and woody debris is really good practices. So is, at that certain time of year, going around and picking up everybody's leaves and hiding them in your Prius and driving away quick, okay? That's what happens at my property. Okay, so those are some of the things there, and that is my last slide, and I hope I made 5 o'clock. Okay, great. Any questions on that? If not, I'm the last presentation. Sarah.
Do you see the most utility of this as a present snapshot of conditions, or
Yes.
future projection of conditions?
Yes, because you want to address what is there right now, and you can give that property owner an idea of what it should look like just by the descriptions in the assessment, if you wanted to bring pictures of what it actually should be. I've had to do that with some of my municipal parks, because I say, actually, you're not supposed to see through the trees. That's, you can tell my accent, it's laced with cheese. So we used to say those areas you could see through the trees, the Illinois hunters would go there. That's where we would let them, the flatlanders. But otherwise, no, you want to have that nice understory, overstory, all those layers, and you're not able to see through. So yes, it's a single snapshot, and you could have this assessment done in maybe 10 years. And hopefully it's different. So, okay.
All right,
Jonathan.
thanks a lot.